Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming these distinguished Chiefs of State and Assistant Secretary Rice to the Baker Institute. Mr. President, ambassadors, members of the Consular Corps, Assistant Secretary, last week here at the Baker Institute, we had another Chief of State, President Shevardnadze of Georgia, who engaged in a dialogue with former Secretary of State James Baker III on how each one of these men, as the respective Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister of the Soviet Union, managed the end of the Cold War from confrontation to a peaceful transition, and hopefully to cooperation and partnership in a global economy. Africa has been seen in the context of the past in many ways in our country, in the context of slavery, in the context of colonialism, in the context of the Cold War. And it is abundantly the time now for us to explore Africa's future in a rapidly changing global environment. The growth rates are quite encouraging, going from 2 to approximately 4% in the continent. Democratization and political reforms, economic reforms, trade liberalization and privatization are making their mark in Africa. It is a story that has yet to be fully told, I believe, to the American people. In June, South Africa will hand over power from one democratic government to another, and over half of sub-Saharan Africa's 48 countries will complete a second round of democratic elections by the year 2000. As part of the Corporate Council on Africa's 3-day summit here, the Baker Institute is very honored to have this distinguished panel of African chiefs of state and heads of government, and the U.S. Assistant Secretary for African Affairs to discuss U.S. foreign policy in Africa, which way forward. We have with us President Sam Nujoma of Namibia, President Omar Bongo of Gabon. We have President Festus Mogae of Botswana, and we have Assistant Secretary Susan Rice, Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. And we hope to be joined by Vice President-elect Atiku from Nigeria shortly. The Clinton administration's foreign policy toward Africa has focused on 3 major and interrelated areas: promoting sustainable economic growth and development, promoting democracy and respect for human rights, and preventing and resolving conflict. It is largely on conflict resolution that we will be focusing our discussions this morning. The United States plays a very important role in conflict resolution on the African continent, but we do see the negative forces at play, especially in the war in the Congo, with the 5-year-old peace process in Angola being stalled, with the war in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and basically in the situation in Sierra Leone, with rebel forces ravaging population there. But we also see how U.S. leadership has helped in ending protracted hostilities in Mozambique and Liberia, and to ease tensions in Burundi. One of the key tasks is to help Africans over the long term build their own peacekeeping and their own capability for conflict resolution. And there are, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming the Vice President-elect Ali Haji Abubakar Atiku of Nigeria. There are also the transnational threats that threaten every continent, and including Africa, as they do throughout the world, and that is terrorism, environmental issues, weapons of mass destruction and weapons proliferation, crime, drug trafficking, and of course the horrible epidemic diseases such as AIDS. So the challenges are truly great as we look at Africa. And the question that is posed is, what should the long-term vision of U.S. policy toward Africa be, and what needs to be done to achieve this vision? It is a fundamental question. It is a very important one. I think it is central to U.S. security and foreign policy interests in the broadest sense of the word. And I hope that our discussion today at the Baker Institute will be a first step toward addressing Africa and the U.S. relationship with Africa. We are truly privileged to have such a distinguished panel of African leaders and our Assistant Secretary for African Affairs with us. It is a unique opportunity, and I want to state that this is the first major step that we are taking in the Baker Institute to focus on Africa. There are many reasons here in the southwest of the United States, in Texas and Houston, given our major trade and economic and commercial relationships with Africa, which you have heard about in the discussions that have taken place on the Council Summit meeting this week. And we're very happy to be part of the Council's efforts in this regard. But going beyond just the economic and commercial aspects, Houston has a very important African community, a very important African American community, and so the cultural ties, the economic ties, the political ties are all there for us to be addressing Africa in this part of the United States, and the Baker Institute will certainly take this on as we move forward in our own research and programmatic activities. I would now like to turn to our distinguished panelists and leaders for their perspectives on where is Africa going and where should U.S. policy toward Africa be going. And I would like to first call on President Sam Nujoma of Namibia to share his wisdom with us. Mr. President.
Speak from here.
You could certainly do it from there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates. Well, the theme of this debate is U.S. and Africa, how we see it as Africans. And I would like to say the following. Despite the fact that the U.S. is the world's largest exporter, its share of the African market is less than 8%. European exporters have the benefit of strong historical ties with Africa, which have been strengthened through preferential programs like the Lome IV Convention and the new policy initiatives such as the proposed European Union-South Africa Free Trade Agreement. Against this background, a forward-looking trade policy with the countries of Africa is in the national and the commercial interests of the United States. It will support Africa's economic growth, thereby enabling the African countries to address issues of poverty reduction and technical and scientific progress. Industrializing Asia too, and Japan have, it seems, made a head start over the USA regarding the penetration of the relatively virgin African markets. Oh, it seems it is. Africa needs to expand very urgently the productive capacity of its economies in order for us to be able to take full advantage of the greater opening up of the US market, which the African Growth and Opportunity Bill promises to bring about. It is hoped that this bill, which has been reintroduced in the Senate on the 18th March 1990, will be enacted during the current session. If passed into law, this bill will give a concrete expression to the proposed new US-African partnership. To get this bill passed requires a concerted lobbying campaign in Washington, D.C. by all our friends in the United States of America, and this needs to be done right now, because much of the remaining 18 months of President Clinton's tenure of office will most likely be devoted to the forthcoming presidential elections campaign. That campaign will in turn focus on the U.S. domestic policy issues. So the time is running out regarding the enactment of this very important bill. During the U.S.-Africa Ministerial Conference in Washington, D.C. last month, a number of key policy elements in the U.S.-Africa relations emerged to indicate what could be done. In the first place, President Clinton made a strong commitment that the USA will lead an international drive towards debt relief for some of the heavily indebted African countries. There is no doubt that debts are impeding development in many of the African countries because much of what comes in the form of revenues is immediately swallowed up by the servicing of those debts. Hence, Africa welcomes this very important initiative and urges Washington, D.C. to follow through its promises. In the second place, there is an emerging appreciation in Washington, D.C. of the need for a three-way balance in the U.S.-Africa cooperation that places equal weight on the encouragement of the flow of U.S. capital to Africa, on increase in both the value and the volume of trade between the USA and Africa, as well as on U.S. official assistance to the African continent. In this way, both the public and the private sector will have a vital role to play in the broadening and deepening of U.S.-Africa relations. We in Africa are happy to note that the key U.S. government development financing agencies such as the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, the Export-Import Bank, and the Trade and Development Agencies, as well as the Africa Development Foundation and the USAID, have been directed to design appropriate programs with a view to supporting access by both America and African business to private equity and other forms of financing or ventures in Africa. Regarding official development assistance, emphasis should be placed on the development of African human capital, means the training of a critical mass in professional, managerial, and technical skills, without which sustained economic development cannot be achieved and correspondingly poverty cannot be reduced. The USA has been able to contain the extent of the devastation of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. We know that a lot of resources which Africa does not have been used in this country to limit the impact of this epidemic. But we hope that we can adapt some of the affordable measures that have been taken in this country to respond effectively to this crisis. On the question of conflict resolution, we believe that tangible and proactive measures should be taken to eliminate this serious threat to African reform efforts, peace, and security. The envisaged US-funded African Center for Security Studies should be implemented as a matter of urgency. There is a need for US support in conflict resolution and programs aimed at integrating ex-combatants and demobilized soldiers in the development efforts. With these introductory remarks, I now have the honor to invite my fellow panelists to make their comments. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to call on His Excellency President Omar Bongo from Gabon to give us his remarks, please. The President will speak in French, and then his remarks will be translated by his interpreter.
Monsieur le Président et chers frères, Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, mes premiers mots seront pour féliciter les organisateurs de cette rencontre. Je voudrais les remercier, ensuite de me donner l'occasion de prendre la parole au nom de mon pays, le Gabon, pour apprécier et évaluer les relations entre les États-Unis d'Amérique et notre continent. Certains pays ont en effet, avec les États-Unis, des rapports de coopération actifs basés sur la culture et l'histoire. D'autres, comme le mien, ont, avec le vôtre, des relations plus récentes. Les évolutions de la politique américaine prennent appui plutôt sur la démocratie, les droits de l'homme, le règlement de conflits d'une part, et sur la libéralisation de nos économies d'autre part. Nous avons également noté chez les autorités américaines le nouveau concept qui associe l'aide au commerce jusque-là considéré comme la seule forme de coopération bilatérale avec l'Afrique et singulièrement avec le Gabon. Enfin, au cours de la récente conférence ministérielle USA-Afrique, la notion de partenariat réaffirmée traduit la volonté d'une plus forte implication des États-Unis en faveur du développement de l'Afrique sur la base des intérêts mutuels. Cette volonté a été également illustrée par le projet de loi sur la croissance et les opportunités d'investissement en Afrique, en examen au Congrès américain. Nous nous réjouissons de toutes ces initiatives. Elles démontrent que l'Amérique a désormais pris conscience que l'Afrique existe et qu'elle est un partenaire avec lequel il faut compter dans notre univers marqué par la mondialisation des économies et la globalisation des échanges. Cette prise de conscience, bien que tardive, nous enlève le sentiment, particulièrement en ce qui concerne surtout mon pays, d'être les exclus, les éternels oubliés de la politique américaine. Elle ouvre de nouvelles perspectives. Elle devrait permettre de répartir sur des bases nouvelles, d'élargir au-delà du pétrole le champ de notre coopération et de placer nos populations comme les principales bénéficiaires des bienfaits de ces partenariats. C'est tout de même pour moi le lieu d'attirer l'attention de l'administration américaine sur la nécessité de corriger un certain nombre de distorsions constatées dans les interventions en faveur du développement en Afrique. Cette politique sélective est injuste à l'égard de certains pays. Le Gabon, par exemple, a accompli au cours de cette dernière décennie des avancées significatives en matière de démocratisation et de respect des droits de l'homme. Des efforts ont été également entrepris en vue de la libéralisation de notre économie. Des privatisations d'entreprises ont été réalisées et d'autres sont en cours. La paix et la stabilité règnent au Gabon. Enfin, mon engagement et celui de mon pays ont toujours été constants. Lorsqu'il s'est agi de ramener la paix et l'harmonie en Afrique centrale, sous-région caractérisée particulièrement par de nombreuses crises et de multiples foyers de tensions. Je suis en effet convaincu qu'il ne peut y avoir des investissements à un développement durable de nos pays sans la paix, la stabilité et la sécurité. Et pourtant, je dis bien et pourtant, cela ne semble guère suffisant pour inciter les Américains à investir chez nous et à développer des échanges fructueux avec le Gabon et le continent africain dans son ensemble. Aujourd'hui, l'espoir est né. Puisse l'esprit de Houston contribuer à concrétiser toutes nos bonnes intentions par une réelle et plus grande implication des États-Unis d'Amérique dans le développement économique, social et humain des pays africains. Je voudrais enfin redire, avec toute la satisfaction que nous tirons des intentions positives prises par le président Clinton en faveur d'un renforcement de la coopération entre les États-Unis et l'Afrique. Nous regrettons quelque peu qu'elles arrivent tardivement vers la fin de son mandat, car nous ignorons de quoi demain pourrait être fait. Nous sommes néanmoins attentifs et confiants. Et comme je l'ai déjà dit, l'espoir demeure. Mais on m'a appris aussi quelque part à dire que qui veut d'espoir meurt de faim. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Your Excellencies, dear brothers, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this meeting. I would like to thank them to give me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my country and to express my appreciation of the relationship between the United States of America and our continent. Few countries in Africa have indeed relationship with the United States of America, and these relationships are based on culture and history. Others, such as mine, have recent relationship with America. The new developments of the American policy are based on democracy, human rights, and settlement of conflicts on the one hand. On the other hand, you have liberalization of our economies. We've noticed now in the USA a new concept which is the aid linked to trade, which is which used to be the only way of cooperating with Africa. During the recent ministerial conference, USA and Africa, the notion of the idea of partnership was reaffirmed, and it shows the will of a greater commitment of USA in favor of the development of Africa based on mutual interests. This will is also illustrated within the Growth and Opportunities Act under consideration at the US Senate. Head of State, dear brothers, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome all these initiatives showing that USA has now realized that Africa does exist and is a reliable partner in the field of global economy. Although late, we in Gabon have the feeling to be excluded, to the always forgotten country of the US policy. This policy offers new prospects. It should be based now, it should have new bases as far as we are concerned, and be broadened beyond oil, which used to be the field of our cooperation with USA. Thank you for giving me the opportunity today to draw the attention of the American administration, Clinton administration, on the necessity to correct a few imbalances as far as the interventions in favor of development are concerned. This policy is selective. This selective policy is unfair towards my country, a few countries, among them my country. Gabon, for example, has accomplished significant achievements in the field of democratization, of respect of human rights. These efforts have been also made in the field of economics. We have privatized a few firms in my country, and we are in the process of privatizing others. We have peace and stability in my country. And my commitment and of my government have always been constant as far as having peace in my country and the sub-region of Central Africa. We know that we are facing crisis in this sub-region, but we are striving to have peace. I'm convinced that you cannot invest for long-lasting development in countries where there is no peace, stability, and security. But I have the feeling also that that is not enough for the American authorities to invest for the development of my country. Today, I have hope, and I hope that this spirit of Houston will contribute to concretize all good intentions by a real and better commitment of the USA in the social, economic, human development of African countries. I would like to reiterate here all the satisfaction we have drawn from the positive initiatives made by President Clinton in favor of strengthening the cooperation between USA and Africa. We regret that they are coming late at the end of his mandate, because we don't know what the future lies for us. Anyway, we are awaiting, and we are still confident that he will do the best for us. And as I used to say, and as somebody also told me, who hopes will die hungry. So I don't want to die hungry. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
It's now my honor to present President Mogai of Botswana, who will make his remarks. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel honored to have been invited to take part in this panel discussion with my distinguished colleagues from Africa, my senior brothers. I only became a president 1 year ago, so I'm a junior to them all, except you, my brother. Thank you. Even though you are from a bigger country. Be that as it may, it is an honor and a pleasure to be taking part in this exchange of views between us African leaders and American business and governmental leaders. I wish to endorse the appointments of President Nujoma and President Bongo, that it's better late than never. We are gratified that at long last, both the administration and corporate America seem to be taking notice of Africa and taking note of the fact that we are doing something to improve our lot. So we are grateful about that. This invitation itself, evidence of the fact that you are at long last taking cognizance of our efforts, however modest they may be. And we would encourage the administration and the people of the United States, including corporate America, to continue to be constructively engaged with us, in spite of reverses in Angola, the DRC, Sierra Leone, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. That's a substantial part of Africa where there is no peace. But there is also an even more substantial part of Africa where there is peace, as President Bongo has just mentioned. And I think that the United States has been involved with intractable situations elsewhere. So you should have the will, you have the power and the means and the experience to be engaged in difficult situations like that. I agree, there are no quick fixes. But we think that the international community and the United States as a leader of the international community, he should remain constructively engaged with us in all these areas of conflict, including and especially the DRC, but also Angola. I know my Angolan compatriots are feeling a bit discouraged at present time, and they say that they don't want to have anything to do with the international community, especially the UN. With due respect, I disagree. I think they have a problem, and I think the international community should remain engaged in Angola, and the United States should remain engaged in Angola, as in fact in the rest of Africa where there are troubles, where there is no peace. Because peace is an absolute precondition, a sine qua non for development. And therefore, the logical starting point in the cases in those parts of Africa where there is no peace, the restoration of peace is an overriding priority. On the economic front, as we have been doing and telling Business America in the last 2 days, we Africans are liberalizing trade, we are reducing taxes, we are reducing exchange controls. In my case, we have abolished them altogether. We are privatizing parastatals, as President Bongo has just mentioned. We are doing that in Botswana, in Nigeria, in Namibia, and also restructuring public assets. All in all, we are endeavoring to create a climate conducive to private foreign investment, and especially American private investment. Many of our countries in the SADC region, for instance, implementing structural adjustment programs, reducing bureaucracy, fighting corruption, democratizing and holding elections. In our part of the world, well, on my right, Our big brother Nigeria have just had democratic multi-party elections. President Nujoma is having elections later this year. I'm having elections later this year, as a result of which, in fact, I've already applied for a fellowship in case I lose to the Baker Institute.
And we have accepted.
And the South Africans are having multi-party elections in June. They are second. President Njomas will be their third. In the case of Botswana, it will be our eighth. Just like that. And then Malawi. I think about 5 of us are having multi-party elections with international observers. So we are democratizing. Deficiencies remain there and there, but the important thing is the change, the direction of change, the pace of change, and the fact that change is taking place, and it is worth your while to support it. What else? Human rights. There are fewer and fewer instances of human rights violations, including women's rights. Miss Assistant Secretary of State. We respect our women, we Africans, even more than you do nowadays. Well, on your part, let me conclude my remarks. We will talk, we'll address these specific issues later. On your part, as I say, first and foremost, remain engaged with us, constructively engaged with us, and be patient. Assist us in our endeavors in improving ourselves. Pass the Africa Growth and Opportunity Bill. Implement debt relief for the poorest of the debt-distressed countries. Liberalize entry of agricultural products into the United States from Africa. I am tempted to digress there and tell a story about my country, because Namibia and Botswana export beef to Europe. And every year, twice a year, we have EU vets examining our disease control measures, and then a separate team of EU vets examining our slaughter facilities and handling and materials used. When they have approved that, then we write to Germany, we write to the UK, we write to Holland. And then each of those countries send their own vets to do exactly the same what the EU vets from Brussels have done. The vets and the hygiene people from London come and do the same. And then when they have done that, the Germans do the same. When they have done that, the Dutch do the same. When they have done that, the Norwegians do the same. And then they agree that our hygiene standards are much higher than they are in Europe. That's a fact. You can go and tell them, I'm not backbiting them. And yet, you still... and that you in the United States, you still refuse to let in our beef. You say for disease control reasons. I think that you know that Texas beef is inferior to Botswana beef. That's why you are using non-tariff barriers. That's a non-tariff barrier. But anyway, that was just in passing. That was just in passing. But yes, quite honestly, we think you should seriously look into these things over time as we remain engaged. And come and inspect is the way the Europeans are doing. Instead of just importing half-cooked beef from Argentina to use it in hamburgers. It's much, much less healthy than... But anyway, the point I'm making there, maybe somewhat humorously, is that as we proceed, we have to systematically evaluate, reassess our relations, our relationships politically, trade-wise, investment-wise. We have told you that as far as investment is concerned, we are willing to do what it takes to attract private foreign investment. We are putting ourselves in your place as business people in the United States and saying, if we were the rich, big Americans, what would you expect in order to go to a foreign country and leave the comfort of our own countries? And so that's what we are trying to do. That's what President Bongo was saying. That's what President Nujoma was saying. And that's what I'm saying in so many ways. And that's what he's going to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now our honor to present the Vice President-elect of Nigeria, Alhaji Abubakar Atiku.
Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen, I think I would like to start by, first of all, endorsing my more experienced statesmen on this panel for the views they have expressed about US-Africa policy. At the Clinton's first term, Africa really was left wondering whether there was any policy by the United States on Africa, because there was actually apparently none. But by 1998, when President Clinton visited 6 African countries in March and came back, we now knew and began to realize that an Africa policy was in the formulation and was about to be launched. And I think subsequent US initiatives demonstrated that after the president's visit. Of course, then came the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is still in Congress. Like my colleagues have said, we urge the Congress to pass this bill in time. Time is running out for this administration, as one of the presidents has said. Our hope is that this bill passes the US Congress so that Africa and the United States can begin to get engaged in trade. Also, another aspect of US policy as far as Africa is concerned is the recent ministerial meeting, which was hosted in Washington. This is also another further testimony of US engagement in Africa. We believe that the sustenance of these meetings is one way of engaging United States and Africa. In fact, we will go further to advocate a US-Africa summit so that issues that are discussed at the ministerial level can get the approval of heads of states at that level, and then they become more effective. It is our hope that the present US-Africa in engagement will be continued by subsequent administrations. We do not wish to see any other administration coming in to derail this very positive policy, which is in the best interest of both the United States and Africa. Most of African countries are positioning themselves, I would say, for US markets, both public and private sector outfits. Structural adjustments are taking place all over the continent. Democratic elections are holding all over the continent. Human rights are being improved. There is a general climate all over the continent to attract both private and public sector involvement or engagement from the United States. I know Europe has dominated trade in Africa over the years, and I think this new policy of the United States is bound to reverse the trend in the interest of both US and Africa. US involvement also in conflict resolution in Africa should further be enhanced so that the various conflict resolution taking place mechanisms in the sub-regions of Africa can get the attention of the United States so that in the few areas that we have flaring conflicts, these conflicts can be resolved and brought under control for a peaceful and stable atmosphere that is required for development. I have just returned from a trip from Angola. I would like to endorse the comments made by my brother, the president of Botswana. The Angolans feel very, very bitter about the attitude of both the United States and the international community. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the United States have found itself today as the only superpower in the world. So every blame is being heaped on the United States, is understandably so. But the Angolans are feeling left out because they believe the international community is not paying attention to the conflict in Angola, or either fueling the conflict in one way or the other by not getting the parties engaged. So I think this is also an area where US-Africa policy should be further strengthened. We have a number of sub-regional economic outfits in Africa. The United States is further encouraged to get engaged with these sub-regional economic blocs because they form a basis for stronger trade links with the United States. If these economic sub-regional groups are assisted and have an integration, it will be easier for the United States to deal with an economic subgroup than dealing with member states on bilateral basis. I think this is an aspect where US-Africa policy should further be enhanced. One area that has also been emphasized by the distinguished panelists here is the debt relief program. We appreciate the administration's initiative on that. We are also calling on the administration to support negotiations with IMF and the Paris Club so that debt relief programs can further help support poverty alleviation programs that are being initiated by member countries in Africa. We also call on the United States to consolidate all bilateral agreements that have been entered with Africa so that aspects of those agreements that are not being implemented now can be implemented for the benefit of United States and Africa. Of course, the summit which is taking place in Houston is a very welcome development, and we believe our presence here is a testimony and a commitment by Africa to be engaged with the United States in both the private and public sector. We are continually making efforts and progress to create conducive climate for investment, trade, because these are things that bind countries together, and therefore work towards strengthening relations. I thank you very much.
I would now like to turn the podium over to the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Susan Rice. I'm very tempted, Susan, to ask you to talk about Africa's policy toward the United States, since you've heard everything about U.S. policy toward Africa. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'd like to begin by expressing my thanks and gratitude to President Bongo, President Njoma, President Mohai, and Vice President-elect Atiku for honoring us today with their presence. They are an extraordinary collection of visionary leaders in Africa who are doing a great deal to realize the promise of Africa and to strengthen our relationship with the African continent. We are wiser for their presence, and really, I wish to thank you for all being here again. I'd also like to thank the Baker Institute, because it's a rare opportunity that we have as policymakers, both African and American, to share with a diverse audience our interests in greater cooperation with Africa. And this is something that I'm particularly pleased to do in Houston and in Texas and in this part of the country, because quite honestly, we don't have this opportunity often enough. And if I might, with your indulgence and apologies to many of our African colleagues here, I'd like to talk a bit about some of the myths that are prevalent in the United States about Africa. Now, our African partners and colleagues know the reality far better than many of us here in the United States do. And I can hardly do a better job than President Nujoma did of outlining American interests in Africa. But I'd like to, if I might, touch upon these issues from a U.S. perspective. I think it's very common to hear Americans, when they talk about Africa at all, to lump all of Africa together and to view all of Africa as a monolith and, in fact, as a basket case. Our press, frankly, doesn't help in this regard, because all we see, if we see news of Africa at all, are stories of famine and conflict, genocide and disease. The reality is Africa and sub-Saharan Africa is a diverse continent of 48 distinct sovereign states with very, very different interests, very different orientations, different policies, different economies, and different political systems. And to talk about Africa as a monolith would be like saying there's no difference between the state of Texas and the state of Maine. And those of us in the U.S. would understand that there is a huge distinction. So Africa is not a monolith, and what we have here today are representatives from some of Africa's most promising countries. The reality is that 2/3 of African countries are pursuing bold economic reforms to liberalize their economies, privatize their industries, and open their markets to the global economy. The vast majority of African countries are now democratic or on the path to democracy. Yes, there are conflicts. Yes, there is strife and a great deal of suffering. But that is only part of the story, and I would in fact argue not even the large proportion of the story. The reality is that much of Africa is doing well. It is growing on average at about 4% a year. A number of economies are growing far faster than that, reaching double-digit growth rates. And we in the United States need a much better appreciation of the diversity and complexity of Africa. Secondly, I think I want to address a common myth that I hear often as I travel around the country, as well as in Washington, and that is that the United States has no national interests in Africa, that in the wake of the Cold War, we really have nothing but a humanitarian stake in Africa, and that is perhaps in some people's minds something that they can take or leave. Well, I'd like to say that nothing could be more wrong or more dangerous as we think about our relationship with Africa. And I'd like to illustrate that point by asking the general question, what are our interests in being engaged in the international community and the global economy more broadly? Obviously, in the first instance, we have an interest in protecting the United States, its territory, and its citizens from all manner of threats to our national security. And increasingly these days, those threats take the form of what we call in Washington transnational security threats. In the wake of the Cold War, we have less to fear from nuclear holocaust and from arms races, although certainly weapons of mass destruction remain a significant concern. We have much more to fear from threats that know no borders, whether they be terrorism, weapons proliferation, international crime and drug trafficking, environmental degradation, and disease. And equally, we have an interest as we engage globally in the international community in furthering our viability as a leading economy in the world. We are an export-driven economy. We need markets. We need trading partners. We need trading partners not just in Europe, not just in Asia, not just in Latin America, but in Africa and every other part of the world with which we can trade in our mutual interest over the long term. And so when we look at our relationship with Africa, we need to look at it not in a romantic way, but in a clear-eyed, hard-headed national interest perspective. We have fundamental national interest in cooperating with African countries to further our mutual security in the present and the future. We cannot fight global terrorism. We can't fight international crime and narcotics. We can't fight weapons proliferation, whether they be chemical, biological, nuclear, or conventional. We cannot deal with environmental threats and disease unless and until we have strong, stable, democratic, growing partners in Africa and around the world. Equally, we cannot hope to continue into the future as an export-driven economy if we write off whole markets across the world. Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is a market of 700 million potential consumers. We export more to Africa in 1997, 45% more to Africa than we did to all of the states of the former Soviet Union combined, including Russia. 100,000 US jobs depend directly on our exports to Africa. And yet, as was pointed out by President Njoma, the United States enjoys less than 8% market share in Africa. So as the African market grows, and as the US share of the African market grows, we will be creating jobs not only in Africa, but in the United States, and increasingly in places like Houston, Texas. So we have a clear interest in a growing, stable, prosperous, peaceful, and democratic Africa. It's for that reason that as the United States under President Clinton's leadership has reoriented our policy towards Africa, we've focused on two overarching policy goals. The first is to work with our African partners to help accelerate Africa's integration into the global economy. Obviously, that is essential for Africa's growth and the prosperity of its people, but it is also essential for the United States for the reasons that I described. And as we go about the process of trying to help accelerate Africa's integration into the global economy, we do so by working on three key areas on a daily basis. First, obviously, we are investing through not only trade, investment, and aid in trying to spur sustainable economic growth and development in Africa. Secondly, we are actively working to promote and sustain democracy and respect for human rights. Because without democracy, without respect for human rights, no country and no collection of countries is viable politically or economically over the long term. And thirdly, and by no means least important, it's vitally important that we, in cooperation with our friends and partners in Africa and elsewhere, work to help prevent and resolve conflict so that conflict no longer retards and undermines the progress that is being made in many parts of the continent. Our second overarching policy goal in Africa is to work with our partners in Africa to combat these transnational threats to our mutual security that I described. There are some, I imagine, still, even in Washington, who perhaps doubt the reality of transnational security threats that emanate from Africa. They're there. It's not a phenomenon unique to Africa. These threats are global. They come from every part of the world. But if people needed a reminder of the reality of those threats, then we were unfortunately given a horrible reminder last August 7th when bombs exploded in our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. These were bombs that were directed at the United States, but unfortunately killed hundreds and thousands, killed and injured hundreds and thousands of Kenyans and Tanzanians. The threat we face from global terrorism, as well as other transnational security threats, are real and they're present, and we need to cooperate increasingly with our partners in Africa to combat those. President Clinton has, as I said, radically reoriented our policy towards Africa. It is now a policy built on the principle of partnership. We are past the days of the Cold War. We're past the days of donor and recipient, of an unequal relationship. We seek a relationship with the continent of Africa and the countries of Africa that's based on mutual interest and mutual respect. President Clinton has launched a number of initiatives that are designed to reinforce the key elements of our two policy goals towards Africa. I could go on at great length about the various initiatives. I don't want to take a great deal of time, but if I might mention a number of them to illustrate the point. When it comes to integrating Africa into the global economy and promoting greater economic growth and sustainable development in Africa, the President has launched an initiative in 1997 called his Partnership for Economic Growth and Opportunity. It's designed to not only increase our development assistance to Africa, but increasingly to work to open the U.S. market to African products and to promote bilateral trade and investment in Africa. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, which so many of our heads of state have referred to today, is an important element of that overall policy, and the administration remains energetically committed to working to see that legislation pass this session of Congress. But at the same time, we are doing things inside the administration that don't actually require legislation. We have a new Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Africa. We have a radically invigorated Exim Bank, now open for business in many countries of Africa, where just a couple of years ago it was not present. We have a new presidential initiative on debt relief, which will, if endorsed by the G8, substantially benefit Africa. We are investing in regional integration through new relationships with Africa's sub-regional organizations, from ECOWAS in West Africa to SADC in Southern Africa, to the East African Community and IGAD in East Africa, and organizations in Central Africa and elsewhere. We are also working on the problem of conflict resolution. On a daily basis, we are consumed with the conflicts of the day, whether it be our efforts to broker an end to the conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea, our efforts to be as supportive as we can of SADC and the region's efforts to deal with the crisis in the Congo, or our long-standing investment in the Angolan peace process. Two of our colleagues on the panel have made particular mention of Angola, and I want to assure them and others that the United States remains deeply committed to a partnership with the government of Angola and to helping to resolve the conflict there through any means we can. We are also working to prevent and resolve conflict over the long term and to help build African capacity to do this. And that is why the President has launched the African Crisis Response Initiative, which is a long-term effort to provide training and other support to enhance peacekeeping capacity in Africa. It's why we are in the process of inaugurating something called the African Center for Strategic Studies, which will train civilian and military leadership in defense policy planning, budgeting, and other aspects of the relationship between civil and military leadership in a democratic environment. This is modeled on the Marshall Center that we established in Germany to support similar activities with respect to the countries of Eastern Europe. We also are the largest donor to the OAU's conflict management mechanism, and we have contributed over $100 million to ECOMOG, the West African peacekeeping force, over the course of this past decade. We're also investing in the promotion of democracy and human rights. This goes beyond our electoral assistance in various countries. It goes beyond providing observers to helping build civil society at the grassroots level, investing in judiciary programs and the rule of law. The President has also launched an initiative for the Great Lakes region of Central Africa called the Great Lakes Justice Initiative, which is aimed at building judicial capacity, civilian and military, to help break the cycle of violence and impunity that has led repeatedly to ethnic violence and genocide in that part of the world. And lastly, in this regard, we are investing in Africa's human capital, which in many ways is the most important investment we can make over the long term. We are doing that through a new initiative to invest in education in Africa, as well as to begin the process of helping to train African entrepreneurs for competition in the global economy in the century to come. Lastly, let me say that we are also beginning the process of putting in place programs that will deal directly with the challenge of combating transnational security threats in Africa. We are starting this year to provide technical assistance and support for counterterrorism training. We are cooperating increasingly with partners from Nigeria to South Africa on combating narcotics and international organized crime. And we have proposed to the countries of Southern Africa, the SADC countries, the establishment of an international law enforcement academy in the SADC region, replicating initiatives that we have launched in Europe and Latin America aimed at building law enforcement training capacity. At the same time, the Secretary of Transportation, Rodney Slater, has launched something called the Safe Skies for Africa initiative, aimed at enhancing the security and safety of airports and air transportation in Africa. This panoply of efforts are not disjointed, they're not disparate, they're all aimed at reinforcing these two primary policy goals, and they're part of our effort to invest in our mutual interest in Africa's security, prosperity, and democracy in the century to come. I want to close by saying we have been grateful for the tremendous bipartisan support we have received in Congress for this new policy approach to Africa. I am hopeful, therefore, to respond to the concerns of some of our fellow panelists, that this will be a U.S. policy for Africa that doesn't end in 2001, regardless of who's elected, but that we pursue in our national interest and in our interest in seeing Africa succeed as a national policy, not a Clinton administration policy. The support we've received from Congress has also been matched by very committed and energetic leadership on the part of the American corporate community. And we are the beneficiaries of that commitment here in Houston this week. And that too gives me great hope that we are embarked on a new national course with respect to Africa that is, has its foundations in various parts, from churches to boardrooms and from the White House to the halls of Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have many questions from the audience. I will try to characterize them, and I will leave it up to whomever wishes to take the initiative to respond to them. There is a series of questions on the economic and social development of Africa, and what the prospects are for regional economic integration in Africa, akin to what we see in Europe, akin to what we see in Latin America, for example, Mercosur and other collaborative efforts on the part of countries in other continents to integrate their economies regionally. Would this work for Africa? Should this be a policy goal for Africa?
We in the SADC region think it can work. We are, in fact, trying to do exactly that. We are, as you know, 5 of us are in a customs union. That is Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland. Now, in the SADC, we are trying to establish, to start with, a free trade area among ourselves. In fact, we have negotiated a trade protocol, which, if it came into effect, would establish a free trade area among ourselves. I think 5 of us, 5 or 6 of the countries have already ratified that protocol. The others are still preparing, but the putting together and signing of that protocol is, in fact, an endeavor to we're aiming at regional integration, of course, as a long-term objective, starting with increasing trade among ourselves, building on our experience between the 5, that is the 5 that are in a customs union, Therefore, that's something in which we believe. We think it's an objective worthy and capable of being achieved. We appreciate that there are obstacles. It will require persistence and perseverance in the short term.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, I would like to agree with the president of Botswana that a number of regional groupings in Africa are aimed at economic integration. That's the ultimate objective. And the case study is also that of ECOWAS. A number of protocols, custom union, monetary union, free trade, all these protocols have been signed at the highest level, and member countries are ratifying them. So we think ultimately regional economic integration in union is achievable in Africa, and we're on the way of doing that. It requires political will to achieve that. Of course, as the president of Botswana has said, there are obstacles here and there, but ultimately we are getting there.
President Njoma.
Thank you very much. Certainly, I agree with my colleagues, the President of Botswana and the Vice President-elect of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, that regional economic grouping can be linked. But we have one obstacle there. On the political side, certainly we all agree, since we have signed the Abuja Treaty in 1991, in Abuja, the new capital of Nigeria, which established the African Economic Community. We are all committed to that. However, the African continent being large as it is, certainly the obstacle is means of communication. Because trade can really only be successful where there are means of communications. By rail, by road, by air, and by sea. And this requires certainly to have to spend more money on linking up our respective countries. As you are aware, Africa's history was, after the scramble of Africa, divided, some under Portuguese colonialism, some under French colonialism, some under British, and of course, all these various colonial powers were working for their own interest. Actually, the colonies were maintained to fit the so-called mother country. Now, mother country is either France or Britain or Portugal, and that cannot work. So therefore, here we would like to call in the United States from its own experience, from the east to the south. We have trucks coming all the way from New York to Houston, carrying goods. But this is what is lacking. It requires capital and expertise. So we hope that this summit will think now of massive US shipping line across the Atlantic, bringing merchandise goods made in the US to Africa, and take raw material or ready material, or assist us to produce our own, to manufacture on the spot. And the US is in a position to do so. So I hope from this summit, there will be a genuine change of US towards the African continent. And we have the political will to ensure that we implement this in our lifetime. And I think it can be done. However, I would like to say that one of the examples US has done was during the former President Bush's administration, when we had the civil war in Somalia, where the Somalis were dying more than 1,000 per day because of civil war and hunger. President Bush, on his own, decided to send the U.S. troops with food to prevent the civil war and to assist practically the Somalis who were dying. But yet, we members of OAU, we were just there. It was only after the intervention of the U.S. government that the UN even have sent a peacekeeping force to Somalia. This example, if it can be followed, of the Bush administration by many ways, certainly there will be improvement. All certainly demand political will, and the President Bush had that political will, and he did it. So many initiatives can be taken from those kind of examples. I thank you.
Monsieur le Président, voulez-vous commenter? Non.
La question, je crois qu'elle est la même que le président de Botswana, le président de la Namibie, le vice-président du Nigeria ont parlé. Je vais répéter la même chose, alors c'est pas la peine.
I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have just said. What they've said is just right. It's the same situation we are having in Central Africa, so I don't want to repeat them. Yes, I agree with them.
We have a series of questions. I'll try to put them in a general frame of reference, but I think President Njoma has already responded to one concerning to what extent are the legacies of colonialism still creating problems in Africa, and I think you have addressed that. There are several questions on what are the root causes of poverty in Africa? What can be done in terms of building up the human resources of Africa? And what policies are the African countries putting in place to address education and research needs in Africa? Concern about not moving forward on developing human resources in Africa could lead to further marginalization and abuse of people. Comments on that, those observations and questions. President Njoma.
I would like to comment on a build-up of human resources development. Some of us who have just emerged from the ashes of apartheid colonialism, where the minority white regime of South Africa has designed a policy of denying and deliberately deprived the indigenous people education and training. In Namibia, we are very much behind, and we would like US to assist us in terms of education and training in all fields, especially in technical fields and research. In Namibia, we have mineral resources throughout the country, ranging from uranium, diamonds. Diamonds are even being mined onshore and offshore, and gold, zinc, copper. With a population of about 1.7 million, and the size of land of Namibia is about that of Germany and France put together. You can imagine in Germany there are about 70 million. And in France, more or less the same. But these people, because they have the technological know-how, are able to live in their own countries and make a better life. So the chance for Namibia to be developed and able to feed its own people with its own resources, as well as to be able to provide employment to others, this can be done through intensive education and training. Of course, right now, we do not have our own expertise. At our university, which is just about 6 years old, we have professors and lecturers from friendly countries. And I think that in Namibia, we need to concentrate to human development resources. And then I believe we will be, in the next 10, 15 years, 20 years, be able to effectively combat poverty, hunger, disease, and ignorance. And of course, where you have poverty, you find that there is always a civil war as a consequence of people tend to grab what those who have. The have-nots would like to have from the have. And this is precisely the problem in my country. The minority white settlers who occupied the country for more than 100 years have acquired and accumulated so much wealth, and that you find a family of a white person, they have more than 4 cars. Whereas there are fellow Africans who, during the under-colonial occupation, they don't even have a shelter, they don't possess anything. They were working as slaves for the whites, and it was on that basis that we have adopted a policy of national reconciliation immediately after our independence, embracing fellow whites and said to them, here we are all victims of colonial occupation, first by the Germans, and then later on by the South African minority white settlers. Let's working together. Some of them are forthcoming. The other day, for example, just an example, a fellow white citizen came and see me at the State House and said that he has more than 20 farms, but he wants to exchange 6 farms with a fish quota. But then I said it's not possible. But I let him go. Then the next day, after a week, I invited him for a lunch at the State House, and I said to him, look, you are a Namibia citizen. You are entitled to fish quota. You don't need to exchange the fish quota with the farms. But you can see your fellow Namibians, thousands of them landless. Why you don't donate these 6 farms to the government? Because we are entitled to fish quotas. And he said that, okay, I'm going to think about it. And after a month, he came back and said, I'm giving this 6 farms free to the government, since I'm entitled to the fish quota as a citizen. So those are the problems we inherited from apartheid colonialism. And we need to work very hard, and we need to train our people so that with the few fellow citizens who are from the white section of our population, we can contribute towards tangible economic development will be beneficial to all our people, irrespective of color or race. I just wanted to make that contribution.
Thank you, Mr. President. President Mokhai?
Well, one difficult question: what is the cause of poverty in Africa? One has been mentioned by President Njoma. It's of course the colonial legacy, and as part of that colonial legacy, gross mismanagement in the past, inappropriate policies, gross mismanagement, lack of democracy, which resulted in lack of accountability, and therefore corruption, and therefore a gross misallocation of the country's resources. And so those are parts or some of the causes of democracy in the past. And as I say, I mean, of poverty. And also, more controversially perhaps, misguided policies in the past of over-centralization of economic power in the hands of the government, and failure to realize an important role in development that can be played by the private sector, both the indigenous private sector and of course private foreign investment. Then of course the sum total of these of course resulted in social upheaval, and when there is social upheaval you don't have development. Right now in the countries where there is fighting, if you take Angola, it's potentially one of the richest African countries, and the people are poor because of lack of peace. Because in fact, ever since they took independence, instead of using the resources to build on the little they found, they have in fact been using the resources to destroy whatever infrastructure there was, whether it's social or human. That's what has been happening. So that's the cause of poverty in that particular example. But it follows that it's in the logic of circumstance that where there is no peace, instead of generating wealth, you generate poverty. But plus, of course, the other reasons that I have mentioned. By centralist policies, when our decade of independence, there was still communism, and we were attracted to communism, partly because the West with which we were associated, we also associated it in our minds with colonialism. That was a pity that we did that, but we couldn't help it. We suffered from the egocentric predicament, as philosophers say. But anyway, that one on the causes of poverty. Those are just some. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you.
Most African countries were basically initially the first causes of poverty, because infrastructure and education was tailored to satisfy the colonial masters, not for any meaningful development. And of course, a lack of democracy, which culminated in dictatorships, whether civil or military, of course, also encourage corruption, gross mismanagement, as the president of Botswana has said, and therefore dwindling in scarce resources which should have otherwise been used to develop those economies. Of course, when you don't have democracy, as they have aptly described, you eventually end up with lack of transparency and accountability, corruption, and therefore, civil war. And of course, civil war destroys all fabrics, of a society. So basically, the causes are the same in Africa, because Africa was under colonial rule for, in some cases, hundreds of years, in some cases, about 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you. You have 2 comments, please.
I was going to say regarding education, in many African countries, human resource development, basic education and human resource development in general, it's receiving priority. Certainly, it's the case in my country, it's the case in Namibia, I know for certain. It's the case in Gabon, I just happen to know. Well, you'll say, why am I claiming to know? See, I worked for the IMF and I dealt with African countries. So I have some familiarity with what is happening in some of the African countries. Education receives, in my country, for instance, it receives the highest budgetary allocation. And takes 25% of both the recurrent and the development budget, education and training in the broadest sense. So that's what we are trying to do to remedy the deficiencies of the past, because obviously countries' people are the most precious resource. So that at least is the little efforts we are doing. I know African countries have been criticized of spending more on the military than on education and health. And that criticism was legitimate. But I'm saying that we are correcting that in many cases in our countries. We are now spending more on human resources development. And certainly in my country, we are spending more on education alone, education and training alone, than in any other sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. President Najoma, do you want to?
Yes. I just wanted to bring up a specific case, and this is Angola. When we look at the historical background of Angola, first, when the Portuguese occupied that country, they did not develop the country. They were simply shipping out the wealth of that country to build up Portugal. And they also divided the indigenous on ethnic basis. And after independence, which came as a result of the coup that was lodged by the young officers of the Portuguese army in metropolitan Portugal. For the first time, Africa at least have contributed to the liberation of a European country, that is Portugal. Because if the freedom fighters of Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, and Saint Tomé did not fight, I don't think the Portuguese ever gave up colonies in Africa, because they were referring to the colonies in Africa as Portugal's overseas provinces, not even colonies. So, but what happened after the coup in Portugal? The Portuguese withdrew, but they have left their security agencies there, work on UNITA, Savimbi, in particular, this particular individual African. And he was, when the Portuguese left, they handed him over to the South African military intelligence. He was based in Namibia when we were fighting for Namibia's independence. And after Namibia's independence, he went back to Angola, still being helped by the South African minority white former generals. And we also know the US at the time of Cold War supported this misguided African Savimbi, thinking that through him, US will minimize the USSR communist influence in Angola, but it did not work. Now Savimbi is there destroying the infrastructure. The second largest city, Wambu, is totally destroyed to the ground. Now here we have a common interest. With the US, we would like to see peace, stability, and development. A city was spelled out by President Clinton during the African Ministerial Conference in Washington. Now let us unite on Angola and really form a crusade brigade for peace in Angola. to make sure that Savimbi is brought to his senses. That time has come for Savimbi UNITA to join the peace forces. Up to now, Savimbi depends on the support of Western countries, particularly US. Why you support somebody who's committed to destruction, suffering, and horror of his own people? I think the US should change from the policy of thinking that they will have more better influence over Africa or over Angola through people like Savimbi. Savimbi is a creation of Portuguese colonialism, and apartheid South Africa is not a man to be supported. Thank you.
Assistant Secretary Rice.
Thank you. I'd just like to respond briefly on the issue of U.S. policy towards Angola and to commend President Njoma for, I think, a very comprehensive and accurate rendition of the history of the conflict in Angola going back to the colonial days. But there is one element that I do need to clarify for the record. It is quite true that during the course of the Cold War, the United States was the principal external supporter of Savimbi. We provided all manner of arms and other forms of support. That support ended at the conclusion of the Cold War, and the United States, along with Portugal and Russia and others in the international community, fully backed the Lusaka Protocol, the peace agreement brokered by the states in the region along with the United Nations to try to bring to an end, yet again, the conflict in Angola. That protocol was signed in 1994, and the United States and others in the international community provided hundreds of millions of dollars worth of humanitarian assistance, as well as peacekeeping assistance through the United Nations and other forms of support aimed at trying to consolidate that peace. Unfortunately, the peace process unraveled last year, largely due to the fact that Jonas Savimbi, who had committed himself to various steps under the Lusaka Protocol, ranging from disarmament to joining the national government, refused to fulfill any of his commitments. The peace process died because Savimbi failed to honor his commitments. And at that point, the United States, along with the international community, which had already imposed, going back now 2 or 3 years, several forms of sanctions on Savimbi, found itself no longer in a position to try to be an honest broker in support of a peace process, but having to come squarely to face the fact that this peace process had failed because one party, that is Savimbi and UNITA, failed to meet its obligations. And that realization has led, unfortunately, not only to the downsizing and now phasing out of the UN mission in Angola, but to a substantial shift in the US policy towards Angola. It was the Clinton administration in 1993 that established diplomatic relations with the government of Angola. We have now a healthy and growing bilateral relationship with the government of Angola. We want very much to see that relationship strengthened and deepened, and we do so in the context of a clear understanding of who's responsible for the current conflict. We do not support Jonas Savimbi. We have not supported Jonas Savimbi for many years, and I think we're in full agreement with the sentiment expressed by the President of Namibia that he in no way, shape, or form merits the support of the international community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are unfortunately running out of time, and I only have the opportunity to ask another category of questions. We've gotten many, many questions from the audience. Your presence here has elicited a great deal of interest. The last series of questions are on regional conflict resolution. Let me just give you an overview of some of the questions. Many of the serious problems in Africa, refugee flows, armed conflict, ethnic cleansing, occur within the borders of a country. Should we encourage international intervention within countries? One question. what is the proper balance in conflict management between regional organizations such as the Organization of African Unity, the UN, and United States involvement? And then a series of the same questions from the audience. To what extent do you feel the U.S. role should be in conflict resolution in Africa? These are all interrelated questions, and I invite your comments. President Njoma.
Thank you very much. Internal conflict, which sometimes occurred as a result of interference by foreign powers, more particularly former colonial powers, who think that they can, through certain elements that they are supporting, and always supporting ethnic grouping. And as such, people start fighting among themselves. But in SADC, we have decided in Cape Town in 1997 that SADC countries will not allow or tolerate any overthrow of a legitimate government elected democratically by the people, and that SADC countries will put or use everything in their power, including armed forces, to suppress a coup or any violent overthrow of a government. As my colleague, the president of Botswana, was saying, in SADC countries, we have about 5 countries that this year will run for democratic elections. And this is what we are encouraging. And as to whether US could come in to assist, yes, US can come in through, in the case of SADC, through SADC, or invited by the Organization of African Unity. Because always not SADC or any other economic grouping do not have the resources available, whether it's food, medicine, or any other, to support the internal refugees or refugees who have left their country because of the civil war. The point in case now is Democratic Republic of the Congo. When dictator Mobutu was overthrown by a revolution led by President Kabila and his colleagues, only some few months after that revolution, before they could even reorganize the government, a rebellion took place by the same colleagues of President Kabila, intending to overthrow him. But this rebellion is supported by some African countries, namely Rwanda and Uganda. They claim that there are elements of originary Rwanda or Uganda who are in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and from there they are waging attacks against Rwanda or Uganda. And therefore they find justification to lodge an aggression and occupation of some parts of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As we are talking here, some allies of SADC members, namely Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, we have our forces there who are there at the invitation of the legitimate government of President Kabila, of which country is a member state of SADC. Now there we need the US support in terms first of assisting the DRC government financially, foodstuffs, medicine, to the internal refugees who are displaced persons within the DRC itself, and also through the United Nations and the OAU, to specifically to exert pressure on Uganda and Rwanda to withdraw their troops from the DRC, so that DRC could be assisted by, in this case, because there is a very serious civil war where people are dying every day, with the placement of a peacekeeping force, which ought to be agreed or worked out through the OAU and the United Nations. And I'm pleased to see that 2 weeks ago, the Security Council have worked out a resolution. And I think here we need the US government support in order to find a peaceful solution to the Congolese problem. And we are requesting the US government to pressurize Uganda and Rwanda, because these are the countries that are supporting the rebels who are causing so much suffering to the Congolese people. Our troops are there to ensure the territorial integrity and to safeguard the lives of the Congolese people. So this is our request to the US government. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. President?
Well, on conflict resolution, I think the US should be engaged, as I said earlier on. But as the Vice President-elect of Nigeria said, it would be desirable in the US doing so to use existing regional organizations, including the OAU. I think it's also in the best interest of the American people, where, for instance, there was this West African force engaged in Liberia. One way of the US being helpful is supporting an effort like that. I know the US did endorse the West African effort in ECOMOG in Liberia. The one advantage of that is that then the American people don't get hurt. They don't have to go there physically, but at the policy level and in terms of resources, they can be engaged that way, and also try to strengthen existing institutions like the OAU and other regional organizations. I think that's one. The other one, of course, so far as prevention is concerned, I endorse the American policy of encouraging democracy, because so far as inside their country, the social problems are caused by lack of democracy, because sections, either geographic or ethnic and so on, feel left out when there is no democracy, when they feel that they have no way of expressing their dissatisfaction within a democratic framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Quand j'entends, beaucoup de mes collègues ont déjà dit tout en ce qui concerne le règlement des conflits. D'abord, il faut savoir quelle est l'origine de ces conflits. Il y a des conflits très souvent, vous savez qu'en Afrique, personne n'accepte d'être battu dans une élection. Tout le monde gagne. Quand on fait une élection, bien faite, selon nous, on la gagne. Mais il y a parfois les interventions de la communauté internationale qui condamnent, il dit, les élections ont été truquées, ont été faussées. Et ceux qui ont élu les gens de l'opposition, qu'est-ce qu'ils font? Ils prennent le couteau, les machettes, les fusils, voilà la bagarre qui se déclenche et ça donne lieu à des conflits. Il y a des gens aussi qui, parce qu'ils ont été au pouvoir une fois qu'ils ont été battus, ils continuent à nuer ceux qui sont au pouvoir. Mais aujourd'hui, nous constatons que lorsqu'il s'agit de certains pays occidentaux, aujourd'hui on voit l'OTAN là-bas à Kosovo, tout le monde est là-bas. Mais quand c'est en Afrique, on dit, bon, vous réglez vos problèmes, on voit les avions qui viennent, chaque pays envoie des avions pour prendre ses ressortissants, et puis on dit, Africains, débrouillez-vous vous-même. Et nous n'avons pas, à proprement parler, l'OIA n'a pas une armée. Ce que nous faisons aujourd'hui, c'est par amitié, on a de l'amitié pour un tel chef d'État, on a pensé que son problème mérite d'être défendu, parce qu'il y a une situation qui a été créée par un président. Lorsque quelqu'un d'autre aussi arrive, on dit, bon, c'est bien. À ce sujet, j'ai toujours félicité mon ami Sam Moussouma ici, parce que ce qui est arrivé en République démocratique du Congo. Bon, après, s'il n'y a pas eu l'Angola, le Zimbabwe et la Namibie, moi je ne sais pas s'il y aurait eu de l'ordre aujourd'hui en République démocratique du Congo. Et pourtant, ceux qui ont armé une partie de la population, ceux qui entretiennent la rébellion, sont des États aussi qui sont à côté, nous les connaissons. Mais eux, Angolais, Zimbabwéens, Namibiens qui sont allés, c'est parce que le président Kabila a fait appel à eux, a demandé à tout le monde. Bon, en ce moment-là, l'OIA aussi en a dit un mot, allez-y. Mais lorsque les choses se sont passées, par exemple, à Bangui, nous étions à une réunion comme ça des chefs d'État d'Afrique et de France. On a choisi certains chefs d'État qui sont allés sur place. La question a été posée et nous avons chacun envoyé un certain contingent de militaires. Mais pour soutenir une armée comme cela, il a fallu, pour le cas spécial de Bangui, que la France paye d'abord. Et puis après, le Conseil de sécurité a pris le relais, donc l'ONU, pour payer aujourd'hui les soldats. Sinon, nous qui avons envoyé des soldats là-bas, nous, Gabonais, Maliens, Togolais, Sénégalais, nous n'avons pas de l'argent pour payer nos soldats qui devaient aller là-bas. Et c'est pour ça qu'aujourd'hui, ce que nous pensons faire, c'est que chaque pays doit mettre à la disposition de la communauté pour des interventions futures des compagnies qui restent dans les pays, on les soigne, ils sont là, ils subissent tous la même formation dans divers pays. Chacun, les instructeurs se déplacent et forment les gens sur place de façon que lorsqu'il y a une intervention à faire, on fait appel à ces pays parce que les éléments qui vont aller faire cette intervention ont déjà subi une formation au préalable. Alors, ce qu'il faut aujourd'hui, c'est quoi? C'est que les grandes puissances et ceux qui ont de l'argent mettent aussi à la disposition de l'Afrique. Nous avons l'OIA là-bas. Qu'on dise pour vos conflits, voilà de l'argent, voilà le matériel, parce que la logistique est très importante dans tous ces genres d'intervention. Alors, aujourd'hui en Afrique, le problème reste posé, mais ce que nous faisons avec nos propres moyens, il ne faut pas qu'on nous jette l'anathème, pourquoi tel pays est là-bas, pourquoi tel pays est là-bas. Mais si nous ne le faisons pas, c'est toute l'Afrique qui va s'embraser. J'ai dit, prenons l'exemple de l'Afrique centrale. Partout, il y a des problèmes. Mais il y a aussi des amis qui envoient des soldats tels que la République démocratique du Congo et la République du Congo, à Brazzaville, les deux Congos, ils sont en ébullition. Alors, est-ce que c'est le lieu ici d'en parler longuement, parce qu'il y a certaines choses qui sont vraiment la cause de ces conflits. Mais je ne crois pas que devant un arropage comme celui-ci, nous puissions parler de ces problèmes. Ils sont tellement délicats. Et puis, moi, avec ma franchise, mon franc-parler, je risque de dire les choses qui demain vont faire la une de tous les journaux. Alors, je préfère m'arrêter là.
Thank you very much. As my colleagues mentioned, the origins of the conflicts are so many. And I will take the case of elections in our countries. All candidates at the elections are all winners. They have all win the elections. Nobody should be beaten in our elections. If one wins, the others are not happy, and they will start fighting. And you have countries behind them, backing them, and they start intervening in our countries. With the opponents and the stage war. That's one reason of the conflicts. You also have presidents who have been beaten during the elections. They don't want to withdraw from power. And they start attacking the new president. They don't let him work. That's another conflict, cause of conflict in our countries in Africa. But anyways, that's the situation. But what I don't understand is the intervention of the international community. For example, let's take the case of Kosovo right now. You have NATO. They intervene in Kosovo. They will give all sort of equipment. They will do all sort of things to help Kosovo to attack this president in Serbia. But in Africa, we are left alone to solve our problems. We don't have means to solve our problems. I will take the case of few countries, let's say the case of Congo. When you have a conflict in this country, for example, all the Western countries, they will send planes to take their fellow citizens. They will forget about the African population. They will just say, you better fight between yourselves, and we will restore our citizens from there. We don't have a force-keeping at the OAU level, because OAU does not have the means for that. What happens actually in our countries? When you have a conflict in one country, given the friendly relationship between the neighboring countries with this country, we intervene. I will take the case of DRC, and I would like to commend my brother Sam Nujoma, who is here next to me, for his intervention in this country. He went there because he has friendly relationship with the Congo, and he went there on the invitation of President Kabila. That was the case of Angola and Zimbabwe, and I have to congratulate those head of state who went there. Otherwise, if they have not been there to intervene, I don't know what would have happened in this area of Africa, in Central Africa. And I know what happened actually, and I don't want to say it now, but we know what the people giving weapons and arms to the rebels. And the situation which happened in the DRC was created by Rwanda and Angola and Uganda. We know that. Anyway, as I said, I want to thank the three countries which intervened to stop the progression of the rebels in this country. We have another conflict in Central Africa, which is the conflict in Bangui. We were attending a summit in West Africa, and a summit which is the French summit, France and Africa summit, and we were informed of what was happening in Bangui. So, with few head of state, we went to Bangui, and we decided of the setting up of a force-keeping troop in this country in order to have peace. But we sent military troops there to four countries, Senegal, Togo, Mali, Gabon. Because of lack of financial means, we asked France to help us. France did help. They sent money to feed and pay salaries of our militaries who are there. And now the UN Security Council passed a resolution, and they agreed to finance the soldiers who are there. And what I feel we should do is to create force-keeping through bodies in all African countries or few countries. We should be training these soldiers, and when you have a conflict in a country, those countries can send the troops you have formed to train for intervention. And superpowers, like the US, should grant money to the OAU in order to finance these force-keeping troops, and for them also to have equipment, because the logistics is very important for this resolution of conflicts. When we use our means in Africa to solve the problems or to solve conflicts, we are condemned. I take the case of this DRC. What we did, a few countries, they went there to intervene and they were condemned. So what are we to do? And in Central Africa, we have many problems. We're only mentioning the DRC situation, but there is also this conflict internal conflict in Congo-Brazzaville. You have to be very careful about that. It's another source of big conflict which is coming. So should we talk of conflicts right here? I don't think so, because I like to speak my mind, and I'm very frank usually. If I start speaking here, I will have to reveal many things here, many truths, and tomorrow it will be in the newspapers, and I know what is happening in Africa. I don't want to talk, so I better stop here, and thank you very much for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of our program. There are so many more questions. I want to apologize for those who I haven't been able to ask their questions. We even got one question, Your Excellencies, from an African American who wants to know if your countries will grant dual citizenship to African Americans who want to work in your countries to aid in economic development. So there's a great deal of interest. I would now like to ask, given the delegations that are here with the presidents and the vice president, if we would all remain in our seats, and if the presidents, in the manner in which they arrived at the Baker Institute, can leave so that we can have the convoys outside. President Mogai, the Botswana delegation first, President Bongo and the delegation of Gabon second, President Njomo's delegation third, and Vice President Atiku's delegation at the end. If you would bear with us, we would be able to get the presidents off swiftly. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, and Madame Assistant Secretary.